The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wooden platform of Sweetwater Station as the westbound train pulled away in a cloud of steam and cinders, leaving behind a solitary figure in a travel-stained wedding dress. Eleanor Whitfield clutched her small carpet bag and a tear-dampened letter, watching the last car disappear around the bend with a finality that seemed to echo the collapse of all her carefully laid plans. It was September 1882. And the Nebraska Territory was still a place where a woman alone faced challenges that could test the strongest spirit. Eleanor had come west as a mail-order bride, corresponding for months with a man named Charles Hartwell who had promised her a new life and a loving home. But when she'd arrived at the designated meeting place, there had been no Charles Hartwell waiting for her, only a hastily scrawled note from the station master, explaining that her intended had married another woman just 2 days earlier. At 24, Eleanor was considered past the first bloom of youth by the standards of her time, though she possessed a quiet beauty that came from intelligence and inner strength rather than mere prettiness. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her gray eyes held a mixture of determination and barely controlled despair as she surveyed her surroundings. The train station consisted of little more than a wooden platform, a small building that served as both ticket office and waiting room, and a water tower that stood like a lonely sentinel against the vast prairie sky. Beyond the immediate vicinity of the station, she could see a small cluster of buildings that constituted the town of Sweetwater. But even that modest collection of structures seemed forbiddingly distant to a woman with nowhere to go and precious little money in her purse. Eleanor had spent the last of her savings on the train ticket west, confident that Charles Hartwell would be waiting to take care of her as promised. Now, faced with the reality of being stranded in an unfamiliar place with no resources and no prospects, she felt the tears that had been threatening all day finally spill over. She sank onto the single wooden bench that provided seating for waiting passengers, her wedding dress spreading around her like the petals of a wilted flower. The dress had been her mother's, carefully preserved and altered for this special day that was supposed to mark the beginning of her new life. Instead, it had become a symbol of crushed hopes and broken promises. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Eleanor look up through her tears to see a wagon coming down the dusty road that led from town to the station. As it drew closer, she could make out a man driving the team with several children of various ages seated in the wagon bed behind him. The sight of a family going about their daily business only made her feel more acutely alone. The wagon pulled to a stop near the platform, and the driver climbed down to collect whatever freight might have arrived on the train. He was a tall man in his 30s with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that showed beneath his hat. His clothes marked him as a working rancher, practical and well-made but showing the honest wear of outdoor labor. "Afternoon. Miss?" he said politely, touching the brim of his hat as he noticed her sitting on the bench. "Waiting for the eastbound train." Eleanor shook her head, trying to compose herself enough to speak clearly. "No, sir. I was supposed to meet someone here, but they didn't come." The man's expression softened with concern as he took in her wedding dress and obvious distress. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, are you all right? Is there anything I can do to help?" Before Eleanor could answer, a small voice piped up from the wagon. "Papa, why is the pretty lady crying?" A little boy of perhaps 4 years old had climbed down from the wagon and was regarding Eleanor with the frank curiosity that only children possess. He had his father's dark hair and serious brown eyes, but there was something about his expression that reminded Eleanor of herself at that age. A kind of old soul wisdom that suggested he had already learned that the world could be a complicated place. "Tommy, come back here," the man said gently. "The lady needs some quiet." But Tommy was not to be deterred. He approached Eleanor with the fearless compassion of childhood, stopping just close enough to study her face with genuine concern. "Are you sad because you lost your mama?" he asked with the directness that only children could manage. The innocent question broke, through Eleanor's carefully maintained composure completely. "I don't have a mama anymore, sweetheart," she said softly. "She died when I was not much older than you are now." Tommy considered this information seriously. Then suddenly, his face brightened with the kind of inspiration that seemed to come naturally to children. "Then you can be my mama," he declared with absolute certainty. "I don't have one either, and Papa says everyone needs a mama to take care of them." Eleanor felt her breath catch at the child's simple solution to what seemed like an insurmountable problem. She looked up to see the man watching the interaction with a mixture of embarrassment and something that might have been hope. "Tommy," he said quietly, "you can't just ask ladies to be your mama. It doesn't work that way." "Why not?" Tommy asked, turning to face his father with the logic of childhood. "She needs a family and we need a mama. Papa, you said God always has a plan, and maybe he sent her here for us." Eleanor found herself looking between the serious little boy and his clearly flustered father, seeing in both of them something she recognized from her own experience. The careful way people held themselves when they had been hurt and were trying not to hope for too much. "I'm Robert McKenna," the man said, extending his hand to Eleanor in a gesture of formal introduction. "And this persistent young man is my son Thomas. We have a ranch about 5 miles west of here." "Eleanor Whitfield," she replied, accepting his handshake and noting the strength and calluses that spoke of honest work. "And please don't apologize for Thomas. He's been kinder to me in 5 minutes than anyone has been in weeks." Robert studied her face, taking in the wedding dress and the obvious signs that she had been crying. "Miss Whitfield, if you don't mind me asking, what brings you to Sweetwater in a wedding dress?" Eleanor found herself telling the story of Charles Hartwell's betrayal, her stranded circumstances and her complete lack of options for moving forward. As she spoke, she watched Robert's expression grow increasingly stern, and she realized that he was angry on her behalf. "So this Hartwell fellow just abandoned you," Robert said when she finished her tale. "Left you stranded here with no way to get home and no resources to take care of yourself." "I'm afraid so," Eleanor confirmed. "I suppose I'll have to find some kind of work here in town, though I'm not sure what opportunities might be available for someone with my limited skills." "What kind of skills do you have?" Robert asked practically. "I can read and write, do arithmetic, and I've had experience managing a household. I taught school for 2 years before my father became ill and needed care. I can cook and sew and tend to children." "You're a teacher," Thomas interrupted with obvious excitement. "Papa, she's a teacher. Can she teach me to read the big words?" Eleanor smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. "I'd be happy to help you with your reading, Thomas." Robert was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with some internal debate. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. "Miss Whitfield, I have a proposition for you. It may not be exactly what you were expecting when you came west, but it might solve both our problems." Eleanor felt her heart begin to beat faster. "What kind of proposition?" "I'm a widower," Robert said simply. "My wife died 2 years ago, and I've been trying to manage the ranch and raise 5 children on my own. It's not working as well as it should, and the children they need a mother's influence." He gestured toward the wagon, where Eleanor could now see several other children of various ages watching the conversation with obvious interest. "I can offer you a home, security, and a family that clearly wants you," Robert continued. "In return, you could help me raise the children and manage the household. It would be a marriage of partnership and mutual benefit, not necessarily romance." Eleanor stared at him, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. "Mr. McKenna, you don't know anything about me. How could you make such an offer to a complete stranger?" "Because Tommy's right," Robert said, glancing at his son, who was still standing close to Eleanor with proprietary protectiveness. "Sometimes God does have a plan that we don't expect. And because I've learned to trust my instincts about people." "You're not here by accident, Miss Whitfield." Thomas tugged on Eleanor's skirt to get her attention. "Say yes, please. Say you'll be my mama. I've been praying for one every night, and now you're here in a pretty white dress just like in the picture book." Eleanor looked down at the earnest little face turned up to hers, seeing in his eyes the same longing for family and belonging that had driven her to answer Charles Hartwell's advertisement in the first place. But where Charles had offered her false promises and abandonment, this man and his son were offering her something real and immediate: a place where she would be needed and valued. "The other children," she said hesitantly. "What if they don't accept me? What if they resent having a stranger come into their home?" "Sarah," Robert called to the wagon. "Come here and meet Miss Whitfield." A girl of perhaps 12 climbed down from the wagon and approached with the careful dignity of someone who had been forced to grow up too quickly. She had her father's dark hair and serious expression, but Eleanor could see the intelligence and gentle nature that marked her as someone who would be a natural ally. "Sarah helps me take care of the younger ones," Robert explained. "She's had to carry responsibilities that no child should have to bear." Eleanor knelt down to Sarah's level, meeting the girl's eyes directly. "Hello, Sarah. Your father has told me how much help you've been to your family. That shows real strength and maturity." Sarah studied Eleanor's face with the penetrating gaze of someone who had learned to be cautious about trusting adults. "Are you really going to stay and be our mama?" she asked quietly. "Would you like me to?" Eleanor asked gently. "We need someone," Sarah said with the honesty of someone who had seen too much of life's harsh realities. "Papa tries, but he doesn't know about girl things. And the little ones cry for mama sometimes at night." The simple admission broke Eleanor's heart and sealed her decision at the same time. Here was a family that truly needed her, not as an ornament or a convenience, but as someone who could provide the love and care that had been missing from their lives. "Yes," she said, looking up at Robert with new determination. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll be their mother and your partner, and I'll do everything I can to make your family whole again." Thomas let out a whoop of joy and threw his arms around Eleanor's neck, nearly knocking her over with his enthusiasm. "I told you God sent her, Papa. I told you she was supposed to be our mama." The other children climbed down from the wagon to meet their new mother, Mary, age 10, with Eleanor's own dark hair and a shy smile, James, 8 years old and clearly the family's protector of his younger siblings, and little Catherine, only 6, who hung back shyly but watched Eleanor with hopeful eyes. "Children," Robert said formally, "I'd like you to meet Eleanor Whitfield, who has agreed to become Mrs. McKenna and your new mother." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The children surrounded Eleanor with hugs and chatter, all of them talking at once and asking questions about everything from whether she could bake cookies to whether she knew any good bedtime stories. All right, Robert said with a laugh that transformed his serious face completely. Give Eleanor some breathing room. We'll have plenty of time to get acquainted on the way home." As they loaded Eleanor's meager belongings into the wagon and she settled herself among the children for the ride to her new home, Eleanor marveled at how completely her circumstances had changed in the span of a single conversation. This morning she had awakened as a hopeful bride-to-be, had spent most of the day as an abandoned and desperate woman, and was now ending as the mother of 5 children and the wife of a man she had known for less than an hour. But as Thomas snuggled against her side, and Sarah began tentatively asking about her plans for their education, Eleanor felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. This wasn't the romantic fairy tale she had imagined when she'd answered Charles Hartwell's advertisement, but it was something better. It was real. The McKenna Ranch, when they reached it in the gathering dusk, was exactly what Eleanor had hoped to find in her new life. A substantial log house surrounded by well-maintained outbuildings, with pastures that stretched toward distant mountains and a garden that showed the careful attention of people who took pride in their home. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said sincerely as Robert helped her down from the wagon. "It will be more beautiful with a woman's touch," Robert replied. "Susan, my first wife, she had plans for flower gardens and improvements to the house that I never had the time or knowledge to implement." That evening, as Eleanor helped the children prepare for bed in their new home, she began to understand the scope of what she had undertaken. 5 children ranging from toddler to near teenager, each with their own needs and personalities, each carrying the grief of losing their mother and the uncertainty of whether this new woman would truly stay and love them. "Miss Eleanor," Catherine whispered as Eleanor tucked her into the bed she shared with Mary, "will you still be here when I wake up?" "I'll be here," Eleanor promised, smoothing the little girl's hair. This is my home now, and you're my daughter now. I'm not going anywhere. Promise, Catherine insisted. I promise, Eleanor said firmly. I'm going to be here for bedtime stories, and when you're sick, and when you learn to read, and when you grow up and get married. I'm going to be here for all of it. Later, after all the children were asleep, Eleanor found Robert sitting on the front porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. She joined him quietly, still wearing her wedding dress because she hadn't yet had time to unpack her few belongings. Second thoughts? Robert asked gently. None, Eleanor replied honestly. Though I'll admit this isn't exactly how I imagined my wedding day would end. It's not how I imagined getting remarried either, Robert said with a slight smile. But Tommy was right about one thing. Sometimes God's plans are better than our own. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch and the distant lowing of cattle. Robert, Eleanor said finally, I want you to know that I understand the nature of our arrangement. I'm not expecting declarations of love or romantic gestures, but I do hope that over time, we can become true partners and perhaps even friends. I hope for more than friendship, Robert said quietly. Maybe not right away, but Susan and I had something special, and I'd like to think that it's possible to find that kind of connection again, given time and patience. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. I'd like that too. I've never been married before, never even been courted properly, if I'm honest. Charles Hartwell's letters were the closest thing to romance I've ever experienced. And clearly, that wasn't real. Then we'll learn together, Robert said, turning to look at her in the starlight. How to be married, how to be a family, how to build something lasting and good. Together, Eleanor agreed, and the word felt like a promise. The months that followed were not without their challenges, as any family knows when trying to blend new relationships with established patterns. There were moments when the children tested Eleanor's authority, times when grief for their lost mother made them reject her efforts at affection, and days when Eleanor wondered if she was strong enough for the enormous responsibility she had undertaken. But there were also moments of pure joy. The first time Catherine called her Mama without prompting, the pride on Sarah's face when Eleanor taught her to braid her hair in a new style, the satisfaction of watching Thomas master reading skills that had been beyond his reach before her arrival. Robert proved to be everything that Charles Hartwell had not. Steady, honest, and increasingly affectionate as their partnership deepened into genuine caring. He consulted her on ranch business, valued her opinions on the children's education and discipline, and gradually began to court her with the small gestures that spoke of growing love rather than mere convenience. You've changed everything, he told her one evening as they worked together in the garden she had planted behind the house. The children are happier, the house feels like a home again, and I feel alive again in ways I'd forgotten were possible. You saved me, Eleanor replied, looking up from the tomatoes she was tending. Not just from being stranded at that train station, but from a life of settling for less than I deserved. You and the children have given me everything I never knew I wanted. The first anniversary of their wedding was marked not with the formal ceremony they had never had, but with a celebration that included the entire extended community. Friends and neighbors gathered at the ranch for a party that honored both their marriage and the family they had built together. Tell the story again. Mama, Tommy insisted as the evening wound down and the children gathered around Eleanor's chair. Tell about how you came to the train station in your pretty dress, and I knew right away you were supposed to be my mama. Eleanor smiled, gathering the youngest children onto her lap while the older ones settled around her feet. Well, she began, it was a very sad day at first, because I thought no one wanted me. But we wanted you, Catherine interrupted with the confidence of a child who had never doubted her place in the world. Yes, you did, Eleanor agreed. And when Tommy pointed at me and said, that's my mama, he was absolutely right, even though none of us knew it yet. Because God had a plan, Thomas added with satisfaction. Because God had a plan, Eleanor confirmed, meeting Robert's eyes across the room. and seeing in them the love that had grown from respect and partnership into something deeper and more lasting than mere romance. The years that followed brought their own joys and sorrows, as all lives do. There were losses and gains, challenges and triumphs, and the slow, steady work of building a family that could weather whatever storms might come. Eleanor and Robert welcomed 3 more children together, but the 5 who had been there from the beginning never felt displaced or less loved. They grew up secure in the knowledge that love could be chosen as well as born, that families could be created by decision as well as by blood. Tommy, the little boy who had recognized his mother in a crying bride at a train station, grew up to become a minister, inspired by his early understanding that God's plans often worked through human kindness and the willingness of people to open their hearts to unexpected possibilities. Sarah became a teacher herself, carrying forward Eleanor's belief that education was the key to expanding one's possibilities in life. She never married, choosing instead to dedicate her life to the children of the territory who needed someone to believe in their potential. The other children flourished as well, each carrying forward in their own way the lessons they had learned about love, commitment, and the importance of seeing past surface circumstances to the deeper needs of the human heart. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of that day at Sweetwater Station was the story itself, told and retold throughout the territory as an example of how the most beautiful love stories often began not with romance and passion, but with simple human kindness and the courage to take a chance on strangers who turned out to be family. Eleanor's wedding dress was preserved and passed down through the family, worn by daughters and granddaughters who understood that it represented not just one woman's dreams, but the beginning of a legacy of love that chose commitment over convenience, kindness over selfishness, and hope over despair. And in the end, Charles Hartwell's betrayal was revealed to be not a tragedy but a blessing, for it had freed Eleanor to find something infinitely more precious than the security he had promised. A love that grew from mutual respect and shared purpose. A family that needed her not for what she could provide but for who she was. And a life that proved that sometimes the most profound happiness comes not from getting what we think we want, but from discovering what we truly need. If this story of unexpected family, second chances, and love that grows from kindness rather than passion touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to be reminded that our greatest disappointments often lead to our most beautiful blessings. Your support helps these stories reach others who may be facing their own moments of despair, showing them that sometimes when one door closes, another opens to reveal a love more profound than anything we dared to hope for. Thank you for believing in the transformative power of choosing to see possibilities instead of problems, and for understanding that the most beautiful families are often those created by love rather than chance.